He said if I ever told anyone, he would ruin my life. That was the first thing Lena said when I opened my door. Not hello, not sorry for waking you up, just that sentence. And the way she said it made my stomach tight. She stood there in the hallway, breathing like she had just run up 10 flights of stairs. Her hoodie sleeves covered most of her hands. Her eyes looked wild, like they were trying to watch every corner of the world at the same time. For a moment, I didn't know what to say. Because people don't usually start conversations like that. Not at midnight, not with a neighbor they barely know. I kept my hand on the doorframe and asked the only thing that came to my mind. Did someone hurt you? She shook her head quickly, too quickly. No, not like that. What? Her voice cracked on the last word, and that was when I noticed the small white packet in her hand, sugar. She lifted it slightly, almost like proof. I actually came to ask if you had some sugar, she said softly. I ran out. The words sounded rehearsed, like something she practiced in her head while standing outside my door, but the fear in her eyes told a completely different story, because nobody looks that scared over sugar. For a few seconds neither of us moved. The hallway behind her was quiet, the kind of quiet that makes every little sound feel too loud. Somewhere in the building a pipe clicked inside the walls. Lena looked back over her shoulder for just a second. Then she looked at me again. And suddenly, I understood something without her saying it. She didn't want to stand in that hallway anymore. I stepped aside. Come in, I said. She hesitated like the floor inside my apartment might disappear under her feet. Then slowly she walked past me. My place wasn't anything special. Small couch, tiny kitchen, a desk covered in sketch pads and my laptop. I worked as a freelance graphic designer, so half my apartment always looked like a messy art project. But when Lena stepped inside, she looked around like she had just entered a different world. A quiet one. Safe. I closed the door gently behind her. She stayed near it at first like she wasn't sure if she was allowed to walk further. I'll grab the sugar, I said. She nodded but didn't speak. In the kitchen, I opened the cabinet and poured some sugar into a small container. My hands moved automatically, but my mind stayed on the girl standing in my living room. Lena had moved into apartment 3B across the hall about 6 months earlier. We weren't friends. We were the kind of neighbors who exchanged small nods in the hallway, maybe a quick, hey, while checking the mail. But even with those small interactions, you notice things. Like how she sometimes wore sunglasses at night, or how I occasionally heard shouting through the walls from her apartment. Or how once, late one evening, I found her sitting on the staircase with her face buried in her arms. I never asked questions. Most people don't. We convince ourselves it's not our place. I walked back to the living room with the container. She was still standing near the door. Here, I said, holding it out. She stared at it, but she didn't take it. Her hands were shaking, not a little, badly, the kind of shaking you can't hide even if you try. Lena, I said quietly. She swallowed. Then she whispered something so soft I almost didn't hear it. I didn't really come for sugar. The room felt even quieter after that. She looked down at the floor like the words had fallen there and she didn't know how to pick them back up. She started. Her voice stopped. Her shoulders trembled. I just didn't know where else to go. And suddenly everything I had noticed over the past 6 months lined up inside my head like puzzle pieces finally finding their place. The shouting, the late nights, the sunglasses, the exhausted look in her eyes every morning. Something was very wrong in apartment 3B. But I didn't ask questions. Instead, I walked to the kitchen again and put the sugar container down. When I came back, I pointed to the couch. You can sit if you want. That was it. No interrogation, no pressure, just an offer. She looked at the couch like it was something unfamiliar. Slowly she walked over and sat on the very edge of it. Her back stayed straight, her shoulders tense, like someone ready to jump up and run at any second. I went back to the kitchen and filled the kettle with water. The soft sound of it running felt strangely loud in the quiet apartment. Tea? I asked. She nodded without looking up. While the water heated, I leaned against the counter and watched the steam beginning to rise from the kettle. Something about the moment felt strange. Not bad, just important. Like one of those small turning points in life that you don't recognize until much later. When the tea was ready, I carried 2 cups to the table. Lena wrapped both hands around hers like it was the only warm thing in the world. For a long time we didn't talk. She just stared at the steam rising from the cup. Slowly. Her breathing started to calm down, the shaking in her hands eased. Minutes passed, maybe 20, maybe 30. Time felt soft inside that quiet room. Eventually she spoke again. Do you ever feel like you wake up one day and realize your life isn't yours anymore? I looked at her. That sounds heavy, I said. She gave a small, sad smile. That's because it is. Another silence. Then she said something that made my chest tighten. He used to be kind. I didn't ask who. I didn't need to. People change slowly, she continued. So slowly you don't notice it happening. Her eyes stayed fixed on the tea. First they tell you how to dress. Pause, then who to talk to. Another pause. Then eventually you stop recognizing yourself. The room felt smaller, but she quickly shook her head like she had said too much. I'm sorry, she whispered. I shouldn't dump all this on you. You're not dumping, I said. You're sitting. That made her look up for the first time. Really look at me. And something in her expression softened. Like a person who had been holding a heavy bag for too long and suddenly realized someone else was willing to carry a corner of it. We sat there like that for another hour, talking a little, sitting a lot. At some point her shoulders finally relaxed into the couch. The tension slowly left her face. And then, sometime after 2 in the morning, something unexpected happened. She fell asleep, right there on my couch, still holding the empty tea mug. I stood there for a moment watching her. She looked different while sleeping, peaceful. You could see the person she might have been before life became complicated. I grabbed a blanket from the bedroom and gently placed it over her. She didn't wake up. The apartment felt warmer somehow, fuller, like kindness itself had weight in the air. I turned off the lights and sat quietly at my desk, and while I listened to the soft sound of her breathing across the room, one strange thought kept repeating in my head. Lena didn't come for sugar. She came for something far more dangerous. Hope. But there was one thing I didn't know yet. Someone in apartment 3B had already noticed she was gone, and before the night was over, that someone was going to come looking for her. Lena was still asleep when the first knock came. Not loud, not angry, just 3 slow taps on the door. I froze at my desk. The room was dark except for the faint light from my laptop screen. Across the apartment, Lena shifted slightly on the couch but didn't wake up. 3 taps again. My heart started beating faster, because something about that knock felt wrong. People who visit friends knock differently. They knock with confidence, with familiarity. This knock carried something else, control. I stood up slowly and walked toward the door. Every step felt heavier than the last. Before opening it, I glanced back at the couch. Lena was still asleep, the blanket pulled up to her shoulders. One hand rested loosely around the empty tea mug. For a moment I considered ignoring the knock, pretending no one was home, but whoever was outside already knew someone was inside. The hallway light cast a thin line under my door. Another knock, this time a little firmer. I opened the door just a few inches. A man stood in the hallway, tall. Mid-30s maybe, clean haircut, expensive jacket. The kind of guy who probably looked charming in daylight, but his eyes were sharp, cold in a quiet way. He didn't introduce himself, he didn't smile, he just looked past my shoulder into the apartment. Is Lena here? He asked. His voice was calm. Too calm, I stepped slightly into the doorway, blocking his view. She's resting, I said. That was all. The man's jaw tightened just a little. Yeah, he said slowly. She tends to run off when she's upset. He took one small step closer. I'm her boyfriend. Something in the way he said that word made my skin crawl. Not love, ownership. Behind me, the couch creaked. Lena had woken up. I didn't turn around, but I could feel the shift in the room. The air changed instantly. Fear has a strange weight to it. When it enters a room, everyone can feel it. The man noticed too. His eyes moved again, trying to see past me. Lena, he called casually, you ready to come home now? Silence. Then I heard her voice from behind me, small but steady. I'm not coming back tonight. The hallway went quiet. For a few seconds, no one moved. The man looked at me again, then over my shoulder. His expression didn't explode into anger the way I expected. Instead, he smiled, and somehow that was worse. "Baby," he said gently, "you're being dramatic." I felt Lena stand up behind me. She didn't walk to the door, though. She stayed back, like the space between them mattered. "I just needed some air," she said. The man nodded slowly. "Of course you did." He placed his hands casually in his jacket pockets. Then his eyes landed on me again. "And you're her neighbor, right?" Another smile, thin, polite, but there was pressure underneath it. "Well," he said, glancing past me again, "thanks for keeping her company." The hallway light flickered softly above him. Then his voice dropped just a little. "You can come home now, Lena." Not a question, an instruction. The room behind me went silent. For a moment I wondered if she would go, because leaving an unhealthy relationship isn't one big dramatic moment. Sometimes it's 1,000 tiny battles, and the hardest ones happen in silence. Then Lena said something that changed the direction of the entire night. "No." Just one word, quiet but firm. The man's smile disappeared, not completely, just enough. "You're tired," he said calmly. "You'll feel different in the morning." "No," she repeated, this time stronger. "I won't." The hallway air felt tight. He studied her for a long moment, then he looked at me again. "You mind giving us a minute?" he asked. I didn't move. "She's fine talking from there." That was the first moment his patience cracked. Only slightly, but enough to see what was underneath. His eyes hardened. "This isn't really your business." I held his gaze. "It became my business when you showed up at my door at 2 in the morning." The silence stretched again. Behind me I heard Lena take a slow breath. Then she said something that surprised both of us. "I packed my camera." The man turned toward her voice. "What?" "My camera," she repeated, "and my hard drive." Another pause, "And that's important because—" Her voice was steadier now. "Because those are mine." Something flickered across his face. For the first time since opening the door, he looked uncertain. "You're being ridiculous," he said. "Maybe. But I'm still not coming back tonight." His jaw tightened again. Then he sighed like he was tired of the conversation. "Fine." He stepped back from the door. "I'll give you the night." Relief almost started to rise in my chest. Almost. But then he added something else. "I'll come back tomorrow." His eyes met Lena's. "And we'll talk when you're thinking clearly." He turned and walked down the hallway. His footsteps faded slowly toward the stairs. I closed the door and locked it. The quiet inside the apartment felt different now, heavier. I turned around. Lena stood in the middle of the room, her arms wrapped around herself, her face pale, but her eyes looked different than they had earlier, stronger. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "You didn't cause this." "I brought it to your door." I shrugged gently. "You also brought the sugar story." A small laugh escaped her, weak but real. Then she walked back to the couch and sat down again. Her hand still trembled slightly. "You didn't have to stand there like that," she said. "I know." "But you did." I leaned against the kitchen counter again. "You stood up to him first." She looked down at the floor. For a moment neither of us spoke. Then she said something quietly. "I used to photograph people." I blinked. "Used to." "I still do," she said quickly. "Just not as much lately." Her eyes lifted slowly. "You know what photographers chase." "What?" "Truth." She looked toward the door. "The real kind." Another pause, then she looked back at me. "And tonight I finally saw mine." I didn't know what to say to that, so I just nodded. She leaned back into the couch, exhausted. Outside the window, the sky had begun to lighten just slightly. Morning was coming, and with it, decisions that would change everything. But neither of us knew yet that the photograph that would later win Lena an award had already been taken, and the moment it captured was still standing in the doorway. Lena didn't go back to sleep after that. Neither did I. The apartment stayed quiet, but it wasn't the same quiet from earlier. Before, it had felt peaceful. Now it felt like the calm space between two storms. She sat on the couch with her knees pulled close to her chest. The blanket was still around her shoulders. Every few minutes she glanced at the door. Not like she expected it to open, more like she expected it to break. Around 4 in the morning, I finally spoke. "Do you want more tea?" She nodded. While the kettle heated again, I noticed something on the small table beside the couch, her camera. I hadn't seen it earlier, a black mirrorless camera with a worn strap. The kind professionals carry everywhere. It looked like it had been through a lot, just like its owner. I poured the tea and brought the cup over. Her hands were steadier now when she took it. "Thank you," she whispered. "You're welcome." She stared into the cup for a moment, then sighed softly. "I hate that he came here." I leaned back against the wall. "You didn't invite him." Still, her voice carried the weight of embarrassment. "When people see him, they think he's charming." She paused, "And when they see me, they think I'm overreacting." I didn't respond, because I had known people like that before, the kind who build two completely different faces, one for the outside world, one for the person they control. Was he always like this? I asked carefully. She shook her head. "No." Her fingers tightened slightly around the mug. "He used to be exciting." She gave a small, almost embarrassed smile. "The first time we met, he took me to this rooftop bar downtown. I brought my camera. I was taking pictures of the city lights." Her voice softened slightly at the memory. "He stood next to me and said my photos looked like they were breathing." I raised an eyebrow. "That's a good line." She laughed quietly. "Yeah, it worked." For a few seconds her face looked younger, like the girl she might have been when she first moved to the city. Then the smile faded. After a while the compliments changed. "How?" Instead of saying my photos were beautiful, he started saying they were childish. The room went still again. He said professional photographers didn't take pictures of random things like raindrops and old couples. Her voice dropped slightly. He said serious artists focused on important work. She glanced at the camera beside her. I believed him. I looked at the camera strap. It was worn in the middle, the kind of wear that only happens when something used to be carried every day. "Did you stop shooting?" I asked. "Almost." Her fingers brushed the edge of the camera. "At first he just criticized the photos." Pause. "Then he started criticizing the time I spent taking them." Another pause. "Then he criticized the people I met during jobs." I could hear the pattern forming already. Lena exhaled slowly. "It's strange how control grows." She stared at the steam rising from the tea. "It never arrives all at once." I didn't interrupt. "First it's advice." Then her voice hardened slightly. "Then it's rules." Another breath, and eventually it becomes permission. The word hung in the air. Permission, permission to go out, permission to work, permission to see friends, permission to be yourself. "That's when I realized something," she said quietly. "What?" I couldn't remember the last time I made a decision without asking him first. The apartment felt smaller hearing that. She picked up the camera slowly and turned it in her hands. "You want to know something stupid?" she asked. "What?" "I almost didn't bring this tonight." "The camera." She nodded. "He always said it distracted me." Her fingers traced the lens. "But when I was packing my bag, something in my head said take it." She looked up at me, like a small voice that refused to be quiet. I gave a small smile. "That voice sounds smart." She laughed softly again. "Yeah." Then her eyes drifted to the door once more. "But he'll come back tomorrow." "That's what he said." Her shoulders tightened again. "He hates when people say no to him." I crossed my arms. "Well, tonight he heard it." A few seconds passed. Then she said something unexpected. "Do you know why I knocked on your door?" I tilted my head, because my apartment looked quiet. "That's part of it." She studied my face carefully. Your door is always open when you make tea. I blinked. What? I noticed it weeks ago. She gave a small shrug. Sometimes when I came home late, your door would be open a little. I could see the kitchen light. I thought about that. It was true. When I made tea, I often left the door cracked to let the hallway air move through the apartment. I used to stand in the hallway for a minute, she continued softly, just listening. Listening to what? The quiet. That answer landed heavier than anything else she had said. Your apartment never sounded angry, she added. The sentence hit me in a way I didn't expect. Not proud, just sad, because it meant hers often did. She lifted the camera slowly. Can I show you something? Sure. She turned the camera screen toward me and scrolled through a few photos. Streetlights reflecting on wet pavement, a boy chasing pigeons in a park, an elderly couple holding hands at a bus stop. They were beautiful, real, the kind of moments most people walk past without noticing. You took these recently? I asked. Last month. Why didn't you post them? She hesitated, then gave a small shrug, because he said they weren't worth sharing. I looked at her, then at the photos again. They are. Her eyes flickered up. You're not just saying that. No. Silence filled the room again. But this time it felt different, not fragile, solid. She slowly lowered the camera. You know what's funny, she said. What? The night I knocked on your door, I almost turned around. Why didn't you? She looked at the camera in her hands. Because photographers understand something most people forget. And what's that? She met my eyes. The moment you almost miss is usually the one that changes everything. Neither of us spoke after that. The first sunlight of morning began to slip through the window, soft, quiet, but somewhere across the hall. Inside apartment 3B. Another door had just opened, and someone was already realizing Lena hadn't come home. Morning arrived quietly. The pale light through the window slowly pushed the shadows out of the apartment. The city outside was beginning to wake up. Cars moved on the street below. Someone in the building started running water through the pipes, but inside my living room time still felt paused. Lena sat on the couch with the camera resting in her lap. She hadn't moved much since the sun started rising. Her eyes were fixed on the door again, not in panic this time, in thought. I finished the last sip of my coffee and placed the mug on the counter. You don't have to decide everything today, I said. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she stood up slowly and walked toward the window. The morning light touched her face, and for the first time I could see how tired she really was. Not the kind of tired that sleep fixes. The kind that comes from carrying fear for too long. I already know the decision, she said quietly. She turned toward me. I'm just scared of what happens after. That was honest, and fear like that deserved the same honesty back. Leaving someone like him isn't the hard part, I said. What's the hard part then? Believing you deserve something better. Her eyes held mine for a moment. Then she looked down at the camera again. My grandmother used to say something like that, she murmured. What did she say? Lena smiled faintly. She used to say, courage doesn't mean you're not afraid, it means you walk anyway. The sentence stayed in the room between us. A good sentence. The kind people remember. She walked back to the couch and sat down again, holding the camera strap in both hands. Do you think he'll actually come back today? She asked. Yes. I didn't soften the answer. She nodded slowly. That's what I thought. Silence followed again. Then she asked something that surprised me. Can I stay here until I figure things out? I didn't answer immediately, not because I didn't want to say yes, but because I wanted to say it the right way. You can stay as long as you need, I said finally, but there are 2 rules. Her eyebrows lifted slightly. Rules. Yeah. What are they? First, you make your own decisions. She watched me carefully, and the second, you keep taking pictures. For the first time that morning, a real smile appeared on her face. That's a strange rule. It's a good one. She laughed quietly. Then she stood up again and walked toward the door. My chest tightened slightly. You leaving? I asked, just for a minute. She placed her hand on the door handle. I need to grab a few things from my apartment before he comes back. I walked toward her. You don't have to do that alone. She shook her head. No. Her voice stayed calm. I do. Then she added softly, but you can stand in the hallway. That seemed fair. We stepped outside together. The hallway looked exactly the same as it had a few hours earlier, quiet, still. The pale yellow light from the ceiling lamp hummed softly. Apartment 3B stood across from mine. The door was closed. Lena stared at it for a few seconds, her breathing slowed. You okay? I asked. She nodded. Then she unlocked the door. The apartment inside looked normal at first glance. A couch, a small table, 2 coffee mugs still sitting in the sink, but the air inside felt different, heavy. Lena walked directly to a small desk near the wall and began gathering things. Her laptop, a notebook, 2 camera lenses. She moved quickly but carefully, like someone who didn't want to disturb anything. I stayed in the hallway just like she asked. From where I stood, I could hear drawers opening, closet doors sliding. Then suddenly, everything went quiet, too quiet. Lena, I called. She appeared in the doorway a moment later. Her expression had changed. What is it? I asked. He took the rest of my gear. What do you mean? My tripod, my backup camera, my memory cards. Her voice stayed controlled, but I could see the anger behind it. He said he was organizing the house yesterday. The words came out bitter. Guess that's what he meant. She looked around the apartment again, then shook her head. Doesn't matter. She grabbed the last bag and stepped back into the hallway. Everything important is here. She locked the door behind her. For a moment she just stood there, staring at the number 3B on the door. 6 months of her life were sitting behind that piece of wood. Dreams, arguments, long nights, and slowly disappearing pieces of confidence. She exhaled slowly. Then she turned away. We walked back into my apartment. As soon as the door closed behind us, the tension seemed to loosen slightly. She placed her bag on the couch. Then suddenly laughed. Not loud, just a short, surprised laugh. What? I asked. I can't believe something so small started this. What do you mean? She reached into the pocket of her hoodie. Then she pulled out the small white packet, sugar, the one she had brought to my door the night before. I almost didn't knock, she said. I leaned against the counter again. But you did. She looked around the apartment, the couch, the kitchen, the small messy desk. Then her eyes landed on the doorway. You know something strange, she said. What? When I stood in the hallway last night, I could see you making tea. I remembered that moment, the door slightly open, the kettle steaming. You looked calm, she continued, and that scared me. Why? Because it reminded me of the life I used to want. The sentence settled into the room, heavy, honest. She lifted the camera again and turned it toward the doorway. Stand there, she said suddenly. What? Right there, don't move. I frowned. Why? She adjusted the lens slightly. Because some moments deserve to be remembered. The camera clicked, a soft sound, barely louder than a blink. Neither of us knew it yet, but the photograph she had just taken would become the image that changed her life forever, and the title she would later give it was simple, A Door Left Open. But what Lena didn't know yet was that the man she had left behind was already driving back to the building, and this time, he wasn't coming to talk. The first sign that he had come back was the sound of tires stopping outside the building. Lena heard it before I did. She was standing near the kitchen table, scrolling through the photo she had just taken. The small screen of her camera glowed faintly in her hands. Suddenly she froze, her eyes lifted toward the window. That's his car, she said quietly. I walked closer to the glass and looked down at the street. A dark sedan had pulled up near the entrance. A man stepped out. Same jacket, same posture, same calm walk. My chest tightened. He said tomorrow, I muttered. He never meant tomorrow, Lena replied. There was no panic in her voice now, just recognition, like someone finally seeing a pattern clearly. Down on the sidewalk, he closed the car door slowly and looked up toward the building. For a second, his eyes scanned the windows. Then he walked inside. The hallway downstairs echoed faintly as the entrance door shut. Lena's fingers tightened around the camera. "You don't have to open the door," I said. "I know." She didn't move. A few seconds passed. Then we heard footsteps in the stairwell, slow, steady, coming up. My apartment suddenly felt much smaller, step, 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 each one louder than the last. Lena didn't sit down, she didn't hide. Instead, she walked calmly to the middle of the room and set her camera on the table. "Whatever happens," she said quietly, "I'm not going back." The words weren't dramatic, they were decided. Then the footsteps reached the hallway. Silence followed, and a second later, 3 knocks hit my door, harder than before. I walked over and stopped a few inches from the handle. "You sure?" I asked her. She nodded. "Yes." I opened the door. He stood there again, but the polite smile from earlier was gone. His face looked tight now, controlled, like someone holding pressure inside a sealed container. "I told you we'd talk in the morning," he said. His eyes moved past me. Lena stood clearly in view behind my shoulder. She didn't step back, she didn't hide. For a moment the hallway stayed completely still. Then he spoke again. "You ready to come home?" Lena shook her head. "No." He let out a short breath through his nose. "Lena, stop playing games." "I'm not playing." "You're standing in another man's apartment." "I'm standing somewhere safe." That sentence hit him. I saw it in the way his jaw tightened. His eyes shifted toward me again. "You enjoying this?" he asked. I stayed calm. "No." The hallway hummed with silence. Then he tried something different. His voice softened. "Lena," he said gently, "you're upset, I get that." He leaned slightly toward the door. "But you know this isn't how adults solve problems." She didn't move. "We tried your way for a long time," she said. "And how did that work out?" His patience cracked. "You're being dramatic again." She crossed her arms. "No, I'm being done." That word hung in the air. Done. Something in his face shifted then. Not anger exactly, more like disbelief. "You're throwing away everything we built?" he asked. Lena laughed quietly. The sound surprised all of us. "Built," she repeated. "You didn't build anything." Her voice stayed steady. "You dismantled it." For a moment he had no response. Then his eyes dropped to the table inside the apartment. He noticed the camera. His expression darkened immediately. "You still carrying that thing around?" he said. Lena followed his gaze. "Yes." "That camera is the reason you're always distracted." "No," she replied calmly. "That camera is the reason I remember who I am." The sentence landed harder than anything else she had said. He stared at her, then at the camera, then back at me. "This is ridiculous," he muttered. "You're filling her head with nonsense." "I haven't filled her head with anything," I said. "She walked here on her own." He stepped closer to the doorway. "You think you're helping." "I know I'm not controlling her." That line snapped the last thread of his calm. "You don't know anything about our relationship." "I know enough." The hallway went silent again. Then Lena moved. She stepped forward slowly until she stood just behind me, not hiding, standing. "You're right about one thing," she said. Both of us looked at her. "We did build something." Her eyes stayed locked on his, but it wasn't love. Pause, it was a cage. His face hardened. "You're being manipulated." "No." She shook her head gently. "I'm finally listening to myself." For a long moment no one spoke. Then he gave a short laugh, cold. "You'll regret this." Maybe he expected fear. Maybe he expected hesitation. But Lena did something different. She reached past me, picked up her camera, and lifted it toward him. Click. The shutter snapped. The sound echoed softly in the hallway. His eyes widened. "What the hell are you doing?" "Capturing the moment," she said calmly. "What moment?" "The one where I stopped being afraid of you." Neither of us moved. He stared at her for a long second, then something in his posture changed. The pressure left his shoulders. The fight drained from his expression, not because he understood, because he realized something else. He had lost control. "You'll come crawling back," he said quietly. Lena lowered the camera. "No." He studied her one last time. Then he turned and walked down the hallway. His footsteps faded slowly, just like they had earlier that night, but this time didn't stop. The building door slammed downstairs, and suddenly the silence inside my apartment felt completely different, lighter. Lena exhaled slowly. Her hands trembled again, but this time it wasn't fear, it was release. She looked down at the camera screen. The photo she had just taken filled the display. The hallway light behind him, his expression caught in that exact second. A man realizing his control had ended. She stared at it for a long moment. Then she whispered something softly. "This one matters." I nodded. "Why?" She looked up at me. "Because it's the first photo I've taken in months where my hands weren't shaking." The room stayed quiet after that, peaceful in a way it hadn't been before. Neither of us realized yet that 2 photographs taken within 12 hours would eventually tell the entire story. One of a door left open, and one of the moments someone finally walked away. The apartment felt different after he left, not quieter. The city was still waking up outside. Cars passed. People talked in the street below. Someone upstairs dropped something heavy and cursed under their breath. Life was moving normally. But inside my apartment something had shifted. Like a heavy door somewhere deep inside the room had finally opened. Lena stood near the table with the camera still in her hands. For a long time she didn't move. Then she slowly sat down on the couch. Her shoulders dropped, not in defeat, in relief. I poured 2 more cups of tea without asking. The kettle hissed softly as the water heated and the familiar sound filled the room again. When I handed her the cup, she held it the same way she had the night before, both hands wrapped around it, like warmth was something you could physically hold. "Is it strange?" she asked quietly. "What?" "That I'm not crying." I leaned against the kitchen counter. "No. I thought I would." "You probably already did that part." She nodded slowly. "Yeah." A few minutes passed. Then she lifted the camera again and scrolled through the photos she had taken the night before. The city lights, the old couple at the bus stop, the pigeons in the park. Then she stopped on one image, the photo she had taken of me standing in the doorway, morning light spilling from the kitchen behind me. The apartment quiet, the door slightly open to the hallway. She stared at it for a long time. "That's the one," she whispered. "The one what?" "The one that matters." She rotated the screen toward me. "Look." I studied the photo. It wasn't dramatic. There was no explosion of color, no incredible action. Just a man standing in a doorway with soft light behind him. But something about the moment felt real. "What do you see?" she asked. "A tired neighbor making tea." She shook her head. "I see the moment my life changed." Her voice stayed calm. That was the second I realized something important. "What?" "That the world still had quiet places." The sentence stayed with me. She lowered the camera slowly. "You know what the hardest part of leaving is?" she asked. "What?" "Believing the next chapter actually exists." I thought about that. "Does it?" She smiled faintly. "I guess we find out." Over the next few weeks, Lena didn't return to apartment 3B. She stayed with a friend at first. Then eventually she found a small studio across town. It wasn't fancy, but it was hers. And slowly the Lena who had knocked on my door that night started to disappear. The fear in her eyes faded. The tension in her shoulders softened. And the camera returned to her hands almost every day. Sometimes she stopped by my apartment in the evenings, not because she needed a place to hide, but because she wanted to share something. New photos, new stories, new moments she had captured around the city. One evening she arrived with a printed photograph in a simple black frame. She held it carefully like it was something fragile. "I entered a contest," she said. "What kind?" "Local photography exhibition." I took the frame from her hands. It was the doorway photo, the one she took the morning everything changed. "You won?" I asked. "Second place." "That's impressive." She shook her head. "That's not the best part." "What is?" "The title." She turned the frame slightly so I could read the small card beneath the image. 3 words, "A door left open." I looked at the photo again, the light, the quiet, the doorway. It felt strange knowing that such a small moment had turned into something bigger. "That photo isn't really about me," I said. She smiled. "No. It's about the moment someone finally believed they deserved peace." Years passed. Life moved the way it always does. Slowly, quietly, the city changed. People came and went from the building, but one thing stayed the same. The photograph still hangs on the wall of my living room, right next to the kitchen doorway where it was taken. Sometimes when people visit, they ask about it. They expect some dramatic story, something heroic, something complicated, but the truth is simpler than that. One night a woman knocked on my door at midnight. She said she needed sugar, but she didn't. She needed a place to breathe, a place where someone would open the door and simply say, "Come in, no judgment, no control, just space." And sometimes that is enough to change a life. Lena still sends me photographs from time to time, rain on windows, children laughing in parks, old couples holding hands at bus stops. The same kind of moments she always loved capturing. Small things most people walk past without noticing. Because Lena taught me something about life. The biggest turning points rarely arrive with loud speeches or grand gestures. Most of the time, they arrive quietly, with a knock on the door, and a question you almost ignore. So if there's one thing this story leaves behind, it's this. Some doors change lives, not because of who walks through them, but because someone chose to leave them open. And sometimes the bravest thing a person can do is knock.